Adler really takes the understanding of our lifestyle into then how do we orient ourselves towards a more adaptive way of solving our problems, or maybe stepping outside of our childish, self-focused view of solving problems and having to develop more of another focus.
This is really, really helpful to me to understand. And that question pops up for me is, for those who might be listening, what is Adlerian psychology? Because we keep talking about Adlerian psychology today.
It's an interesting idea of talking about Adler's work in the psychological training world, like Freud or Sigmund Freud, like psychoanalysis was really the dominant influence as psychology was coming out of like Vienna and the eastern part of Europe, and then influencing the rest of the world. Even though there were other philosophers and other cultures and influences that still influenced psychology, Freud really very much overshadowed Adler. And the interesting thing is, so then people today maybe listening to this podcast may have more of an understanding of hearing more pop psychology terms that have Adler's voice that are sort of like hidden, and his voice sort of hidden under many of the concepts that you hear today in psychology. But Freud's voice very much took a dominant influence in the world of psychotherapy. So when I teach my students about Adler today, a lot of times they're very excited about the ideas of what he's talking about, but a lot of the theories that they learn may have been kind of overshadowed by Freud's influence. So to summarize that, I guess what I'm saying is this theory kind of has stayed hidden historically, because I think Adler didn't really care so much about being famous. I think he was more about contribution and about using his ideas to help people. So therefore, it may not be very common for people to understand what Adlerian psychology is, but if I could shortly describe Adlerian psychology, I would say some of the aspects about it really look at, like I mentioned earlier, our social embeddedness, and that our psychology is understood in social context. So that if we feel like we have a place in the world, or that we belong, or that we can contribute to the world, we're often going to see that associated with more positive mental health, as opposed to the other. If we don't feel like we have a voice, or that we can contribute, or that we have some significance in the world around us, that may often be associated with poor mental health. Some of the main concepts of the theory that people may have heard somewhat about would be the idea of like our family life and our birth order, that our experiences and the way that our family has influenced us very much shows up as an influential variable in psychology. Then we also have like Adler looking at the inferiority complex and striving for significance and superiority as some of the concepts that are the cornerstone of this approach as well, and that we grow up as young children and in that world of being a small person who may not have a loud voice or much influence. We come from a place of inferiority, and we're striving often to overcome that and to have a voice and to have a place in the world. But we may often do that in a discouraged way that may not always solve the problems that we need to solve. And like some of the other elements of the theory, for sure, look at how we go about solving the problems in our work lives, our family lives, and our love relationships. So Adler very much looked at how we show up to those life tasks that we all have to sort of solve problems within those throughout our lives is a huge part of the theory. And then some of the other parts of the theory for sure look at understanding our personality or our style of life or lifestyle, and how that becomes a liability to us at times, and that our strengths also lie within that lifestyle. There's a lot of richness to the theory, so it's very difficult to answer the question in just a few minutes. But those are some of like the key words that pop up in Adlerian psychology.
You spoke about social interest, and that helps with collaboration and team improvement and productivity. And I have a specific question. As leader myself, I've experienced this often. You mentioned someone that shows up when they don't feel significance or belonging in a discouraged way. And as a leader, it's really confusing to understand that this is discouragement. Sometimes it shows up as perhaps they're just not interested. Maybe they're just not performing. In Adlerian psychology with individual, how does a leader support someone instead of judging them for the behavior that they're showing and kind of get really deep into it and then go into this social interest part of it, where you can really maintain how we also begin to feel towards this person and look at the whole picture?
Yeah, I guess my first reaction to that would be, if there's a discouraged person we're working with, let's say it's an employee and we're maybe like in a leadership position, or for me, in some cases, if I'm a professor and then I'm teaching a student and I see that there's something going on between us that's a problem, and maybe the person isn't performing, or maybe they weren't happy with an evaluation, I think that's the reality, is like, that's life. Like, there's going to be many people we work with that are just great and they do the job or they perform well, but then sometimes people aren't happy with the outcome of an evaluation or the outcome of a project or whatever it may be. And when we have someone who maybe is dealing that we're really struggling to communicate with them, or they're struggling to communicate with us. So I think applying Adlerian psychology to that type of dynamic is interesting. So one is like to understand this person has their way of solving their problems and striving for belonging, significance. And then we also have ours too. And sometimes like we're going to connect with those people, and our lifestyles or styles of life are going to be very compatible. And then sometimes they're going to be like this, where I might like give someone feedback and someone might be so injured by that feedback and it's so painful for them that they maybe retaliate, or maybe they just don't say anything and I have no idea that they're hurt. Or maybe I give someone feedback and they're like, oh, that's so helpful, and they take it in a very positive way. So I think that's where this is really interesting. It's not just like we're analyzing and understanding that this person is discouraged. It's well, also, where am I coming from and how am I interacting with the world around me, with my maybe students or my children or the people that I'm evaluating in the workplace, or having to do an evaluation on someone's work performance that may influence their pay or whatever outcome that we may be looking at. So I think that's a little bit of how I look at it, is our awareness of how we come across to other people and our sensitivity, I think, to knowing that in a leadership position, we're in this sort of privileged position where maybe if we make a mistake, it's not as much of a big deal the way there may be if the other person makes a mistake. So I think to be aware of our power and privilege in leadership positions is in line with an Adlerian perspective of like owning that and being aware of power dynamics. But then I think Adler also would be wanting to look at like when we have two people or a group dynamic and how we're all fitting together or not fitting together. And that lack of fit or fit between our personalities is so important. Like think of a child who doesn't want to be controlled, who has a parent who expects people are going to comply. And then one saying, you're not going to control me. And the other person is saying, you're going to comply with what I say. Well, I think that same dynamic shows up in the workplace, right? Where our employees or our students or the people in different positions that are higher than us or lower than us in the structure that we're working in. And then we have to somehow navigate all of that. So I think Adlerian psychology has us look at the social hierarchies, and Adlerians have a tendency to, rather than looking at higher than lower, Adlerians kind of look at that we're all like on an equal playing field and that we hope the best for everybody, but we also have these roles like boss or supervisor or student or child, and that somehow we try to like figure out all of those power imbalances, and that the leader, the person in the role of power or leadership of the parent or the boss or the teacher, that they have a great responsibility to be aware of those dynamics. If they can't manage those dynamics and they're just power hungry, then we're probably going to have a lot of problems. Or we're going to have, let's say we're really balanced in our approach to like owning power and being able to create egalitarian relationships, but maybe we're dealing with a really discouraged employee or student. I think for me, my role as like an Adlerian, applying my Adlerian hat in leadership situation, is that I need to be mindful of like the power that I have, and also to be aware of other people's sensitivities and knowing how to be a good communicator and being able to help people to maybe receive and understand some of that feedback.
This is really, really helpful, especially because when we are discouraged and we want someone, I love the example that you gave of a child, we want them to comply when they really just want the autonomy the most. That creates even deeper challenges. So I recently had my lifestyle assessment done, and I'm in my 50s. So this is the first time that I did that, and it helped me understand myself better. And what is a lifestyle assessment? Because I couldn't explain it to someone. I knew that I just misread myself so much. I would take responsibility when someone, was disappointed or discouraged. And it wasn't that I wanted to please everyone, but I just didn't want to take a part in creating chaos. And what I learned was that I was a good human being. And of course, we all think we're good human beings, but we make decisions in this early childhood that keeps leading. And now we're leaders and we keep bringing that child to work with us on a daily basis. It was so freeing. So what is this assessment? How did it begin in Adlerian psychology and how does it play out now?
This assessment, could be often done in talk therapy settings by like a therapist or psychologist, mental health professional, and different types of psychology that aren't Adlerian psychology. It might just look like the first session or two where we learn about the person's story and we might ask some questions to hear like how they solve the problems of life. So like if we're specifically looking at like an Adlerian psychology approach to like understanding myself through the talk therapy world, I often meet with, the idea of being me theoretically I would meet with like an Adlerian psychology practitioner or coach, and they would help me understand how I showed up in life as a child, how those different experiences may have painted the picture of how I saw myself in the world, and then how I navigated my first social life, which is like the family microcosm. And then how I navigated life as I started to move outside of the family life and developed friends and love relationships and eventually moved into my own family. So the lifestyle assessment really is looking at how I showed up in those different spaces of love, work, and school, or the different social domains of our lives. And I guess the idea would be is like learning about my story and how I figured out how to solve problems is where the lifestyle sort of begins. It's like there's a patterned way that I may have shown up, and I may have learned in my family, like I have to always be in control, or I have to always avoid responsibility, or I always need to get someone to take over for me to solve problems. And those maybe were very adaptive roles at one time. And it's learning where maybe those ways of solving problems at one point worked, but then they're not working at different contexts or different developmental times in our lives. So that would be a bit of like that the lifestyle assessment is learning that story about myself and maybe where I solved some of those problems and how those solutions were either strengths or liabilities at different times and then flip-flopped as I got into a new time in my life. And the ways of navigating that, really, I think Adler developed his approach to helping it through using this lifestyle assessment and learning out like what are our basic mistakes that emerge in the pattern of our lifestyle and how are they getting in our way today. And really he used the lifestyle assessment as like the primary assessment and intervention, because as I'm learning about myself and gaining insight, and then Adler really takes the understanding of our lifestyle into then how do we reorient or orient ourselves towards a more adaptive way of solving our problems, or maybe stepping outside of our childish self-focused view of solving problems and having to develop more of another focus. Or maybe some of us just only focus on other people and totally forget ourselves. And that could be a problem too, because that might look like social interest where I'm taking care of others and I'm thinking about other people's needs. But if I forget to take care of myself, that's like being on the airplane where they say, remember, put on your air mask first, then help the folks around you who need help. And I think there's also that balance as well of like, we still need to meet our needs as well as be aware of the needs of others around us, like our families and our loved ones, and somehow try to figure out balancing both of those. So that's a little bit about lifestyle. I'm not sure if I answered all of the questions, but that's some of it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I was also realizing is more we understand ourselves, and when the challenge happens, maybe sometimes it's difficult to figure out what the challenge is until later. But if there's this pattern that keeps emerging, now we can look and say, aha, this is my way of solving problems, and perhaps I can try something different. If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website, yogipateltte.com.